Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Thoughts, where we discuss theophilosophical issues, we answer some of the contentions that are brought against Islam, and we offer a case for the beauty and veracity of Islam as a way of life. Insha'Allah ta'ala, my name is Anwar Arafat, and today we are discussing the toolkit through which to read the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, we are on tools number 7 and 8 in this episode. Tool number 7 is simply understanding the purpose of legislation and knowing that it actually exists. We call this in Arabic the science of Maqasid, which means that we know that there is an intentionality, there's a purpose behind why the Prophet, peace be upon him, would say this, or why he would do this, or why he would legislate this. Right? Just as it exists in the Quran as well. Now, oftentimes for us, we might not have immediate access to that wisdom. So for example, if I'm told not to eat pork, right? A person might say, well, I don't know why that is. Now, as a Muslim, the simple fact that God is the one who says this should be enough, and a lot of times it is. But I also understand that there's an inherent wisdom in why this would be the case. Now, that's not the purpose, that's the wisdom behind it, right? And so, if I can look into these wisdoms, this will actually help build the case for me to trust that whatever the Prophet, peace be upon him, is telling me to do or telling me to stay away from, I know that there's an inherent purpose behind that, there's a wisdom, even if I don't know it in the moment. Now, a lot of times we conflate the wisdom with the purpose. We conflate the wisdom with why we don't, for example, do it. We don't do it because the Prophet said don't do it, or God in the Quran said don't do it. Like I said, that's fine. But is there a wisdom behind it? Yes. And as Muslims, we can research it, we can look into it, and we find out, oh, wait a second, this is actually very harmful. Wait a second, this is actually something very good for me, even if I don't like it. And knowing that there is a wisdom, an inherent wisdom in all of this, will help bolster that propensity for the Muslim to ultimately submit to what God tells them to do and to what his Prophet, peace be upon him, tells us to do and recommends for us as well, inshaAllah ta'ala. We have to realize that it's coming from a place of love, not from a place of burden. It's coming from a place of, this is actually good for us and it's healthy for us. And a lot of times us, as is human nature, we fight back. We want to do what feels good in the moment and not necessarily what is good in the moment. And we ask God to guide us all. So that is number 7. Tool number 8 is to understand historical context. Meaning, a lot of these narrations that we'll find, well, not a lot of them, all of them, happened 1400 years ago. And sometimes even before that, and sometimes a little bit later, meaning from the prophetic time. And not knowing the historical context can actually cause some problems. And this has led people, in some instances, to reject a narration from the Prophet on historical basis alone, not knowing the context. Now we'll give an example. This example actually comes to us about Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, may God be pleased with her. She says that she heard someone, one of the other companions, say that they heard from the Prophet. So look, there's a chain of narration going on. So one of the other companions said that he heard the Prophet, peace be upon him, say that يُعَذَّبُ الْمَيِّتْ بِبُكَاءِ أَهْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ, that the deceased is tormented by the weeping of his relatives upon him after he dies. And she said, there's no way that this can be true because it violates one of the principles that we have in Islam, which is a person is not going to be tormented for the sins of another. And she says, there's no way that a person who's already dead would be punished because someone else is crying. This violates a principle of Islam. Now, she's exactly right. And that understanding led her to tell that companion, what you're saying doesn't make sense. There's no way that the Prophet could have said this. Now, what's going on exactly? Do we not trust that companion anymore? Did he lie about what he heard from the Prophet? He did not. What he was narrating has a historical context behind him. What's the historical context? The historical context is that people in the pre-Islamic days of what we call Ayyam al-Jahiliyyah, we call it pre-Islamic ignorance or barbarism, whatever you want to use, they used to go and pay people to cry on their grave or at their funeral after they died. In his will, he would set aside money. He would be like, this money is to be paid for the wailers. Now, wailer here means W-A-I-L-E-R, right? To wail, to cry, and to like hit themselves and to, shred their clothes, and they would be going overboard. These were professional actors that would be paid to cry. Why? In order for the family to be motivated to cry as well and to embrace their emotions, to get all the feelings out there. If you think about it, sometimes it can be therapeutic to just cry and get the sadness over with. And so these people would hire professional criers, people to cry, on them when they died. And the Prophet ﷺ did not like this practice, obviously for obvious reasons, because it's not sincere. We don't want to create a whole industry around mourning. And so he prohibited this practice, and that's what he was referring to. The hadith itself says that he would be tormented if he had encouraged in any way, meaning both financially and even in words. So sometimes a person might say to his relatives, I want you guys to really cry when I die. If you guys don't cry, I'm going to be upset. It's like, what? Why would you? Now they want to feel important, or he's just saying it to get it off of his chest, etc. So if he did that, that's when he is punished. But if he didn't, then there was obviously no punishment. So there's a historical context that was lost on Aisha. Why? Aisha radiallahu anha never actually lived in a time when there was no Islam. She never actually saw some of those pre-Islamic practices, which means that she would only know about the practices that people had told her. Like I said, this knowledge of historical context is important for us because sometimes we'll read things and we don't understand the context, and it might lead us to initially reject a completely fine and actually beneficial narration from the Prophet simply because we didn't know the history behind it. So knowing the historical context, knowledge of the seerah, knowledge of the life and times of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and even knowledge of the times before he came, and knowledge of the times after he came will definitely add that layer of understanding and accepting, okay, this is what it's talking about as well, inshaAllah ta'ala. So with that, we will end here, and we have the last two tools in the upcoming episode. We'll see you all then, inshaAllah ta'ala. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.